Welcome to GNCC Espresso Live. My name is Mishka Balsam and I will be your moderator for the next hour. The purpose of our webinar series is to better understand how COVID-19 has impacted our lives so far and to start thinking about tomorrow. How will this pandemic change how we live, how we work, how our businesses will function? How has it impacted our corporate partnerships, our supply chains, and our international affairs? And how will it reshape our collective values and priorities? It is critical for us to convene for conversations that encourage us to stretch our minds while determining how to best move forward. Clive Humby, a British mathematician and entrepreneur, said this: data is the new oil. And that is probably how many businesses are feeling. In times of uncertainty, we long for data to define the vast spectrum of what our economy looks like, how we have been impacted, when recovery will take place, and what it will look like. To provide us with some data and insight into Niagara's economy, we are joined by Blake Landry, Manager of Economic Research and Analysis with the Niagara Region, and an invaluable asset to the business community. Blake, thank you for joining us and taking the time to share the results from the latest survey conducted by the region in partnership with Niagara's 12 municipalities. And just to let all of you know about the format, we thought it's best maybe if we hand over the mic and screen to Blake for the first 20-25 minutes to give us an overview of some of the key results from the study, and then we move into the Q&A portion of our session. But before I'm going to get started, I thought, Blake, I'm going to ask you a question unrelated to the survey. We have branded our GNCC webinar series, GNCC Espresso Live. I think many of us behind the scenes are avid coffee drinkers. So we thought we'll ask some of our panelists, and you will be the first one to say, how do you like your coffee? Are you a coffee drinker?
I am a coffee drinker, and I'm a particular coffee drinker. I like decaf coffee with 1 cream and half a sugar, and it has to be that way.
Thank you very much for sharing it. We thought we'll get a library of asking our guests this question and get a little bit more of an insight into each one of our panelists. So thank you very much for being the first one to let us know. For those of you who are wishing to enable the live transcript, please refer to the bottom of your Zoom screen, and that option is available to you, and please feel free to use it. If you have any questions about it or any tech questions, please feel free to use the chat function and we will get back to you immediately. And on that note, let's get started. And Blake, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. So the latest Niagara COVID-19 Business Impact Survey is actually the third iteration of this survey. So we started doing it in April of 2020. And this one, the survey was in the field in April, March and April. So during the announcement of the latest stay-at-home order. And these are the results from that particular survey. So in terms of responses, this gives you a breakdown of responses by municipality. So obviously the larger municipalities like St. Catharines, Niagara Falls, and Welland, higher response rate. However, we do have a good cross-section across all of Niagara municipalities. And we worked with the local Niagara Economic Development offices in order to distribute the survey, as well as the Chambers of Commerce, the Niagara Industrial Association. So thank you very much to those partners for helping us get this out there. We had a very good response rate of about 786 quality responses, which is a good number considering the number of surveys that have been in the field and considering this is our third. So thank you again to our partners, as well as to the businesses for completing this. It's very important in order for us to get additional insights in terms of what's happening to businesses and in the economy. So last April, I presented a Niagara economic update looking at macroeconomic indicators, but that doesn't really tell us what's happening on the ground with businesses. So this is why we needed to do the survey, to get a sense from the businesses what's happening and what we can do to help in the recovery process. So in terms of responses by organization, so 92% of them are businesses, and about 95% of those are small businesses with fewer than 30 employees. So, so that's really well reflected in the survey. We did get some responses from the not-for-profit sector, as well as a few from government. However, those are like your recreational facility type government offices. One question we wanted to ask is whether or not businesses were fully or partially owned by women. So we've never actually had this data in Niagara, and there's been a lot of interest in terms of women business ownership. So I was very surprised to find that the majority of respondents, about 54%, indicated their businesses were either fully or partially owned by women. That will allow us to do additional research into this respect, understanding how the pandemic may have affected women entrepreneurs as well. So by asking this question, we're going to be able to slice and dice this data to see the particular impact on women. In terms of tourism, tourism-based businesses, about 23% indicated they were involved in tourism. Now, this is also important because there is no tourism sector. Tourism is made up of multiple sectors, about 6 different sectors of the economy. So this is helpful to have businesses self-identify whether or not they're involved in tourism. So we can also do tourism-oriented analysis as well. So we can advocate on behalf of those businesses. In terms of businesses by primary sector, we got a really good cross-section of Niagara's business community. So obviously, businesses like accommodation and food service, retail trade, manufacturing, arts, entertainment, and recreation, those really make up the most of the economic base in Niagara. So it's very good to have a strong cross-section of responses, and it's actually quite reflective of the makeup of our business counts in the region. So I was very happy to see that. And by having this data, it also allows us to do custom research into the different sectors, industrial sectors as well. In terms of employment and employment needs, now this one's very interesting. You can see who is currently employed as of the latest stay-at-home order. You could see who was employed prior to the pandemic. And then we can see post-pandemic needs and then hiring within 6 months. So this is really interesting because businesses are planning to hire more than their previous workforce in the post-pandemic world. So we can expect businesses, or at least these respondents, to hire an additional 131 full-time staff, an additional 543 part-time staff, in addition to what they had prior to the pandemic. So the actual employment outlook looks to be quite good from these responses. In terms of businesses that have lost revenue, so 81% of the survey respondents indicated they did lose revenue, so that wasn't a surprise. I don't think any sector was unscathed by the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders. In terms of total estimated lost revenue by these respondents, they indicated it's $388.5 million. So I did some additional value-add work and extrapolated this across the entire regional economy. So it would equal to about 13 billion if every business in Niagara from every sector completed the survey. So that's huge, and that's almost twice as much as where we were at last summer during the start of the pandemic. So so that's very telling in terms of how much revenue was lost in the economy. In terms of estimated percentage of revenue lost, you can see that the vast majority have lost more than a quarter of their revenue, with quite a few losing more than half of their revenue. So this is especially felt in sectors like arts, culture, recreation, accommodation and food services, retail trade. So those would represent the 51 to about 100% of revenue lost. So in terms of businesses that lost revenue, this kind of shows you the breakdown of the respondents reporting lost revenue. So as mentioned, accommodation and food services, retail trade, arts, culture, recreation, other services, which includes things like hair salons, tattoo shops, the personal services sector are included in there, which is why that's quite high. So I would imagine people, this would be expected in terms of sectors and businesses that lost revenue. One thing that was surprising was construction, just because we've maintained a construction boom in Niagara despite the pandemic. However, many are still reporting lost revenue. But in my economic update I did in April, it was quite clear that all sectors lost a degree of productivity. So that could also, indicate that although a lot of businesses were operating, a lot of them had operational challenges, things like health and safety measures and COVID prevention measures on the work site would have affected the business's revenue because they wouldn't have been as productive under certain restraints, and things like staggering shifts and that sort of thing. I've seen that across a lot of construction and manufacturing businesses, just in some of the engagements I've had. So we'll move on. In terms of total lost revenue per sector, this is a breakdown of that 388 million that I identified. And again, arts, entertainment, and recreation comes in at #1, then accommodation and food services, and then manufacturing, which was surprising. So although manufacturing exports skyrocketed and manufacturing gained about 1,200 jobs during the pandemic, they still lost revenue, which was very interesting to me. Another thing I would like to mention is that under arts, entertainment, and recreation, those responses include things like the casino, which would be classified under entertainment, or things like the horse track, or those types of large entertainment facilities. So it's skewed a little bit towards some of those larger operators, because things like the casino lost tens of millions of dollars. So, when you average that out across all businesses, it inflates the number a little bit. But then when we look at, again, average revenue loss per business, the arts, entertainment, recreation is still at about 3.8 million per business. So that's quite significant. Again, accommodation and food services, about 1.9 million per business. And again, most of those businesses in that sector are smaller businesses. So you could imagine a business of 5 to 20 employees losing 1.9 million in their annual revenue. That's a major hit to pretty much all businesses in that sector. Again, manufacturing, 1.8 million per business. Transportation and warehousing, this one was surprising at about 1.5 million per business, because there's been a lot of e-commerce and that sort of thing. However, we've lost productivity in things like agriculture and manufacturing, who would typically use transportation and warehousing services in their supply chain, in their delivery of their services. And then wholesale trade, this is another surprising one at 2 million per business. And again, that would have affected also the transportation and warehousing sector. So as I mentioned, no one is really unscathed in the pandemic, and this really shows what each business and each sector may have experienced during the course of the pandemic. In terms of current status of business, so it was important for us to know what businesses are sustaining and who's quite vulnerable to closure. So that said, 27% of the respondents reported they were at risk or vulnerable to closure. So that's an alarming number. If we lost 27% of businesses in Niagara, that would be a huge economic upset. However, 36% indicated they're sustaining And then 37% indicated they're either stable or doing well. And that was an improvement of the last survey we did about 10 months ago. So it's good that the outlook has improved somewhat. And I think with the vaccinations happening now and ramping up, I think a lot of businesses can see a light at the end of the tunnel. They can see the opportunity for the economy to reopen. So I think that really kind of influenced a lot of the responses, despite we were in a stay-at-home order when they completed the survey. So their outlook was still somewhat positive for 73% of the respondents. In terms of estimated time to recovery, so this one is also very important information. So 30% of the respondents indicated they could recover within 1 year. 23% indicated 2 years in recovery, and then 43% indicated 3+ years to recovery. So I've had a question in the past or in recent past, people are asking, you know, the economy is going to reopen soon and everything's going to be great again. People are going to be spending money, that sort of thing. However, a lot of businesses have assumed a huge amount of debt and are carrying a large amount of financial burden that they had to assume in order to make it through the initial, the stages of the pandemic. So it's going to take a lot of these businesses over 3 years to actually become profitable again, where they can actually meet their financial obligations. So that's really important to note. We're going to see a major upswing in the economy this summer when things start to reopen. I mentioned in the economic update, we have 1.2 billion of unspent disposable income in Niagara, and there's about 30 billion of unspent disposable income in Ontario. So when that money starts to hit the economy again, when people start traveling, visiting restaurants, staying in hotels, and golfing and doing those sorts of things, we're going to see an influx of that money into the economy. So the macroeconomic indicators are going to look good. However, it's important to still recognize that businesses, 43%, need 3+ years to get back on a solid financial footing. So that's going to be a very important consideration through the recovery process, and something we're going to need to keep advocating on for years to come to make sure that these businesses can fully recover. So one concern we have in economic development is our plans for businesses to reduce their footprint. So with these new stay-at-home working conditions for some people, many businesses don't need the same kind of floor space, and these would predominantly be like office-oriented businesses. Like, I don't see this affecting manufacturing businesses or some retail and some accommodation and food services. However, I could see this really affecting the commercial sector, especially commercial real estate. So that said, 12% indicated they plan to reduce their business footprint within 2 years. So this is going to have an impact on commercial vacancies in Niagara, and this is something we'll be monitoring very closely. Also, plans to relocate business within 2 years. So, businesses, many plan to reduce their footprint, and some businesses may have different needs now in terms of their operational needs, and about 16% indicated that they plan to relocate their business within 2 years. So from an economic development perspective, our goal will be to keep these businesses in Niagara when they do decide to relocate. So while working with the local EDOs, like, this is the data that we've provided to them, so they were aware of either businesses or industries that may be planning to either reduce their footprint or relocate in the next couple of years. So there's going to be some real concerted action required here to make sure that we're proactive in making sure they choose Niagara to stay in Niagara. So in terms of topics affecting business workforces, so this is also pretty interesting. Employee mental health is #1 in terms of the major topics affecting their workforces. Number 2 would be overall business stability. Number 3 would be ownership, mental health. So we do see a bit of a pattern there that mental health is an issue right now among businesses and employees. It's important to note that these are business owners reporting these responses. So they're saying that their employees are struggling with mental health and it's affecting their businesses. Some other major concerns are uncertainty regarding like employment stability. So that's just general business uncertainty. And another one is demand for products, businesses, products or services. So I can see a lot of businesses being concerned that maybe some of the consumer spending patterns may change. Maybe their business, customers have developed other habits during the pandemic that might inhibit their return. However, I believe that once the economy reopens, I believe there's going to be a strong market for a lot of these businesses. Even just from my own anecdotal experiences, like I can't wait to go out and eat at restaurants and do the things that I used to kind of take for granted. Now I'm really looking forward to that, and I think all of us could say the same. And then again, other employee-related issues that are affecting businesses. So employee productivity, employee recruitment, employee retention. So, those are very consistent throughout the survey. It's just the nature of the pandemic. It's disrupted the workplace and it disrupted, how employees work in businesses. And another one I like to mention is childcare. So we can see that, most businesses are owned by women. Childcare is an issue. We're going to need support in childcare to make sure everybody can get back to working and to operating businesses. Without that, the economy is not going to have the same level of recovery as if we had these supports in place. So businesses with programs that increase equity inclusion among employees. So 28% indicated they do have these programs. So some people may think that's low. However, I think that's actually quite positive. It shows that 28% of businesses are thinking about these things in their workplace and how it affects their employees, the morale, the productivity. I believe it directly affects those things. If everyone feels welcome in their place of work, I believe they're more productive and more happy employees, and they'll stick around a lot longer. So the hope in the future is to grow this particular percentage. I don't think 28% is very low at this time. I do believe it is a relatively new kind of topic that businesses are thinking about, and I think it's going to become more and more important in the years to come. Not more important, but more prevalent. Excuse me. So staff training is something else we also wanted to look at. So when we look at the percentage of budget dedicated to staff training, so many of the respondents reported 1 to 10% and 11 to 20%. And then you can see some that have much more emphasis on staff training. I believe the industry and the nature of business really influence the level of staff training and development. For instance, I know in manufacturing, a lot of new staff are required to go through a lot of different, training modules and that sort of thing. So you may have more of a training expense there. But again, this is just to help us understand if this is an area where we need to advocate for more programming, more resources and more funding from other levels of government and agencies. In terms of business priorities for 2021 by level of importance, so I've sorted these by most important to least important. So you can see finding and applying for, it should say provincial and federal funding is number 1. Number 2 is improving online presence and activity of the business. Number 3 is improving marketing and promotional activities of the business. Number 4 would be developing business plans and strategies for the business. Number 5 would be implementing new technologies and programs within the business. So these are actually quite positive priorities. It looks like, a lot of these businesses are forward thinking in terms of how are we going to get more people in, how are we going to grow our market share again. So a lot of these businesses, it will be almost like starting from scratch if they're relatively new businesses. So it's quite good that they're looking at these things. We're going to be working with other employment agencies, the college, the university, the chambers, in order to discuss these types of programs and to advocate for resources that can support businesses in these particular priorities. So in terms of top business needs within the next 6 months, so these are immediate needs, and it doesn't surprise me that financial assistance is number one when we look at the burden of lost revenue on most of the respondents. So we're going to need some funding, and we're going to need some flexible financial tools to assist a lot of these businesses to the point of recovery. And again, it's not just 6 months. I believe this will be more of a 3 or 4 year type of requirement. Marketing and promotion, again, this will be when businesses are reopening to get those customers back. Sourcing critical supplies, so this pertains to things like PPE, but I know in a lot of other sectors, again, like manufacturing, there's going to need to be work to domesticate more supply chains, because I know that a lot of businesses had trouble importing supplies, and it shows up in our international trade data in a major way. And so hiring staff, again, big need, as I mentioned previously, and capital investments and renovations to accommodate things like social distancing and things that will allow businesses to be, to respond much quicker in the case of a future pandemic or other major economic disruption like we experienced. So, so I'll move on. So biggest obstacles to business recovery, and I mentioned slow return of customers was one of their main concerns and also perceived obstacle. Cash flow and increased debt loads, as mentioned, the lost revenue burden on businesses is very substantial. Understanding COVID-19 business guidelines. So just understanding that process to recovery. So it's not just everything's not just gonna open up on Friday. It's gonna be a staged approach, and businesses are gonna have to continue to follow and be aware of those guidelines. Again, hiring staff. We're still down about 18,000 jobs in Niagara, so that we're gonna have 18,000 people back in looking for new employment or getting rehired. So that's gonna be a major issue. So we've been talking with the employment agencies in Niagara as well, because they're gonna be an important piece in the recovery. And then no challenges except anticipated. And then training staff, again, is one of those obstacles in terms of bringing staff back to work within the business again after, a substantial amount of time not working. So type of assistance that would most benefit businesses by level of importance. So again, most important at the top, least important at the bottom. However, they're all important. That's the order in terms of how they responded. So financial incentives for business growth, financial incentives for new business investment. So that's all about growth and investment looking forward, about business expansion. I know some businesses, when the economy comes back and markets open up, may be in a place to actually do some expansion. And I believe that's the case in like wholesale trade, manufacturing, industries like that. When I look at the international trade data, one thing that's very interesting is that exports, Niagara exports grew by 1.5 billion during the pandemic. So from about 4 billion to about 6.5 billion. However, imports dropped by about the same. So that's really interesting in that companies abroad were able to source from Niagara companies. However, Niagara companies had trouble sourcing from companies abroad. So that was a really interesting characteristic that I found doing some of this research. Again, advocacy to provincial and federal governments. So that will be around measures to support businesses through the recovery process. Marketing assistance, market intelligence, so investigating new market opportunities. So if we can sustain our increased level of exports, hopefully we can continue to grow that, and that's really going to help drive economic development in Niagara. Support with technology adoption. So I know a lot of businesses had to quickly adopt technology in order to operate within the pandemic parameters. So I think we'll see a lot more businesses investing in technology and being more proactive about using technology to kind of safeguard their businesses and improve productivity and efficiency. Business planning and strategy, again, I would be advising businesses to be looking out maybe short term, maybe within a year, and then maybe longer term, 3 years or so, and going through that planning and strategizing process. It's going to be really important, especially if you're going to be looking for financial resources or incentives from government. They're going to want to see your plans going forward. And I think that's going to be an important area of support. Access to new international markets. As I mentioned, our exports actually grew during the pandemic, and we can probably use that momentum to better leverage some market opportunities abroad. And then staff training, new business partnerships. So I know a lot of manufacturing companies. Again, I'm most familiar with that sector because I work, I'm a NIA board member. But you know, partnering on large projects, partnering on, you know, supplies, getting economies of scale. So looking at new partnerships to benefit businesses could be a good way of kind of safeguarding business going into the future. And then sourcing new suppliers. I mentioned this again, we had trouble sourcing from outside of Niagara. We had trouble sourcing from outside of Niagara. So domesticating supply chains is going to be a big issue in the next few years. So that's the extent of my findings from that particular survey. Of course, a lot of that stuff that I presented goes into far more detail when you look at the actual data. And we'll be using that data to work with groups like the local economic development offices, chambers of commerce, the workforce planning board, Niagara College, in order to look at opportunities and resources and to help businesses navigate to a point of recovery. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Blake. This has been really informative, and it's been actually really nice at the same time to watch the chat and the comments coming back. So a few of you have asked if the presentation is available. It will be shared with all of you afterwards, because I think we really, everyone would like to have access to this information. So that is extremely helpful on that end. So, but now let's go over to a question and a Q&A portion of it, because we've had a lot of people coming forward with questions. And here is one of the first ones, Blake, for you. You mentioned the $1.2 billion of disposable income, unspent household income that is going to hopefully be really igniting the recovery of our economy in Niagara. You looked at the employment outlook and basically saying we're back to the trend of what we've seen in beforehand, maybe at the beginning of or end of 2019, beginning of 2020. It's something that is a positive trend that we're seeing on what we're anticipating to see. How does Niagara fare compared to other regions when we take a look at those areas of it? The employment outlook, the way we have this COVID-19 has impacted us, and the way our recovery is shaping up to be?
That's actually a very good question. So let me contextualize this first. So there are 29 economic regions, census metropolitan areas in Canada. And of all the hardest hit, Niagara was 26. So we're one of the hardest hit economies in all of Canada. And a lot of that can be attributed, and that's from the Conference Board of Canada. That's not me. I get that from the Conference Board. And so part of the cause of that is our really strong tourism oriented sectors and businesses. So obviously when borders close, when we have stay-at-home orders, they are affected the most. We actually have a location quotient of 1.7 in tourism, meaning we have 1.7 more jobs in Niagara, tourism oriented, than in Ontario. So when you think about, the effect, that would be 1.7 bigger loss in terms of employment and that sort of thing. However, when it comes to recovery, Niagara is going to be very attractive to a lot of domestic travelers. I know a lot of people aren't going to want to leave the country for a while, and they're going to look at Niagara for things like tourism opportunities, accommodation, food services, recreation. So that 1.2 billion in Niagara, these buy local campaigns that a lot of the chambers and local economic development offices are doing are so critically important, because we need to keep that 1.2 billion here. And I also mentioned the 30 billion of unspent disposable income in Ontario, and we want our fair share of that 30 billion in Niagara as well. So that's why it's going to be very important to market Niagara to Ontario in particular, as well as to Niagara, to get people to shop locally. So I hope.
Yeah, it actually did. It really did answer the question. And it actually does bring me to another fact that you had mentioned. And you spoke to the relocation trends, that maybe 16% of businesses or respondents to the survey had indicated that they are considering relocation. And at the same time, and the efforts that the Niagara region is putting forward, and all municipalities and other organizations, in ensuring that they're actually staying in Niagara. But throughout the last 15 months, we've heard from a lot of individuals relocating to Niagara too. So I'm wondering, do you see or foresee a trend of businesses actually relocating to Niagara? Because we see individuals finding this an attractive market. It comes with its own challenges, but finding an attractive market to buy a residential home. We're looking at commercial real estate sales who've been, and industrial real estate sales who've been booming during this time. Are we attracting, is Niagara attracting new industries? Do we see an opportunity at this time when businesses probably across Canada are rethinking where they are located? Do we see that as being an economic opportunity for us too?
It is an economic opportunity, and the pandemic probably accelerated that trend. So I work with a lot of the businesses who are coming here because they're looking for local data, local suppliers. They're interested in the local labor market. So they come to me, our team in economic development, both regionally and locally. And it never slowed down during the pandemic. I think it accelerated it. The stats aren't in yet, so I can't say statistically what is happening. It will take a little bit of time. Maybe by December, I'll probably have that data in order to show how many businesses actually migrated into the region. But I can say anecdotally, yes, it's happening. In 2020, we actually transacted more industrial building sales than we did in many, many years. So I do have data on like building transactions. And there's a massive boom in commercial building construction as well. So with industrial, we see a lot of people coming into the region, utilizing older properties. A lot of the EDOs also have a lot of major projects that they're working on. Welland's been very successful at attracting new businesses. Thorold got the new multimodal hub, in partnership, well, in collaboration with the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority. So the Port Weller dry docks is seeing more activity than it ever has in like a decade since I was a kid. So, anecdotally, yes, I've got tons of investment good news stories and that sort of thing. But the data, I probably won't be able to know for sure in terms of what those actual values are, and how many businesses actually relocated and the associated jobs until about December or January 2022. So the data always lags. But also the census data will be available in February 2022. So that will also be very interesting because that's how we will know how many people have migrated into Niagara between 2016 and 2021. So that data doesn't exist right now. We don't have that accurate migration data right now, and it will be available soon. And I suspect that we're going to see huge amounts of people and business migration here.
Yeah. Can I ask you, and it's sheer curiosity, and it mirrors some of the questions that are coming forward too. I know you can't quantify yet what it looks like, how many organizations, what does it look to like for us economically, but can you let us know if we are seeing new industries or sectors expanding or growing? Because we have often thought that Niagara, as a region, we are vulnerable because of a high reliance on the accommodation and food and services sector of it. It has great advantages to us, but it also has exposed vulnerabilities to us in so many areas of it. Do you find that the new businesses that are coming, are we seeing more of the same kind of sectors or industries, or do you, when you look at it and fully understanding that this is really just your glance and your eyes on it, and you haven't done the data analysis of it, but do you see new industries also being attracted to Niagara, or areas where you're saying like, here's a sector and it seems we're growing that area of it? It's maybe logistics, for example, wholesale, like it could be other areas of it.
I'm actually going through that research process now for the 10-year economic development strategy, where I will be identifying where we've seen growth and where we have a high level of location quotient, which is how we identify areas of specialization in the economy. So I can only respond to you anecdotally right now, but through my historical research, Niagara does have a diverse economy. So, you know, when people say, oh, you're very dependent on tourism and this and that, yes, and that's a benefit. We will always have that. And yes, it is vulnerable to things like pandemics, but we do have a highly diverse economy in agribusiness, in manufacturing, and you know, that's always been here as well. I see a lot of manufacturing investment. So we have a ton of opportunity along the canal corridor to get into things like transportation, logistics, multimodal facilities. We have investors like GeoRail took over the Trillium Rail line along the canal. Hamilton Oshawa Port Authorities and Thorold now can operate the multimodal hub. We have Heddle Marine at Port Weller. Like, I can go on and on. There are dozens of these examples of how we're diversifying. You know, that's specific to our industrial base. When we think of things like professional, scientific, and technical services, we do see that growing as well. We do have some specialization. And a lot of that comes through, you know, some of the work that goes on at like Brock, for instance. Norgen Biotech is undergoing a major expansion in Thorold right now. You know, so we do have these areas of expertise. BioLease Pharma in St. Catharines is looking at manufacturing COVID vaccines for international markets. So, you know, it's a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't see in their day-to-day just because you're not looking out for it. It's my job to actually dig and comb for this kind of information. But from my perspective and from being involved in the economic development community across Canada, we are highly, highly diverse here compared to a lot of the other communities who struggle a lot more. You know, the pandemic has been hard on our economy. However, it's been hard on everyone's economy, and as I mentioned, it hit us a little bit harder because of, you know, some of our cross-border dependence and our tourism dependence. So we are a border community. We are one of the, you know, we rely on international trade. We rely on border activity. So when you close that down, you know, it's affected, like I mentioned, all industries. So that's why Niagara would have been a little bit more affected. However, I don't see that as a weakness or like a need to diversify, but I do see that as a you know, as a challenge. But as I mentioned, when the border opens up, like, I think our economy is probably going to recover a bit quicker than some of the other regions, just because we will have that attractiveness to people who want to come and be here and spend here. We are attractive to other companies who want to locate here in, you know, professional services and manufacturing, wholesale trade. We are emerging as a transportation and logistics hub. So we haven't been one, although we have the Welland Canal and multimodal facilities. We don't compare to Brampton or Montreal. Those are major logistics hubs. However, we have that potential, and it is recognized now. Like, the federal government is investing here. You know, they allowed Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority to expand here, which is a federal agency. So, you know, there are a lot of eyes on Niagara right now in terms of growth potential in Ontario and in Canada. to support the Canadian economy. One thing that's really important that people may not realize, so all of the trade between US and Canada, of all of it, 14% comes through Niagara. So that's like over $100 billion in trade every year transiting our infrastructure here. So we got to do better at leveraging that. There's a lot of people passing through, but we got to make sure that they're thinking about doing businesses here and operating here as well. There's a benefit to being located here because we do have proximity to markets, both on the US and Canadian side of the border and internationally through marine.
Yeah, now, Blake, I really, really appreciate, and so do our attendees, your insight, and especially specifically outlining some of the organizations that have invested here, the growth that is there, as well as actually looking at all of the sectors that are actually defining our economy today and likely are going to define it tomorrow. I want to get to some of the questions from our attendees, and there's one particular one from Faye, and they're asking if you could expand upon the collaboration with Niagara College and Brock University when it comes to training. Are there any other partners that are helping out? And this is a really interesting question, because there's a lot of conversations right now. The Ontario government is also putting funding into the micro-credentials and courses, because businesses are recognizing that lifetime learning, I think, is here to stay, and skill development is an ongoing aspect of their investment in their staff, in their organization that is there. Is the Niagara region leading some of the conversations when it comes to the needs of employers and employees in their skill development and local training?
So we are involved in that. It's my colleague Val Coons who's doing a lot of the coordination around that. They had a meeting with all of the employment agencies on Friday where I presented, well, I didn't present, I was actually getting my vaccine at the time, but my director presented the results on from our survey on the labor force to inform them of some of these characteristics that we're seeing. Like then there's going to be a huge role for them in the recovery process, like I mentioned. So they had those conversations on Friday. So all of this is very new. These results have been out, I think maybe not even a month now. So we're having these conversations. In terms of Niagara College, I'm actually presenting to them and meeting with them this afternoon to discuss the results of the survey on some of the work that we're doing that can help inform them of programming that they can be doing to support businesses. So they have research, they have capacity and they have expertise in their research and innovation division that can actually help businesses. They have a lot of capacity there, So I presented this to mostly all of those service providers in the region at this point in time. But this afternoon, we're actually going to get into the details with them. Yeah. So again, I'm working through all of this right now. There's a huge demand on research and information. So it's just managing and making sure everyone has the information they need to make informed decisions. In terms of Brock U, again, it's Val who's having most of those conversations, but they are all at the table. So I can't speak specifically to that. However, I have responded and I've helped them with information related to their initiative around micro-credentialing. But again, I'm the research guy and Val is the relationships and manages that. So in terms of actually what's being done, I haven't been in all of those meetings, so I can't really say specifically. However, those conversations are happening. And we're going through that process right now. And it's actually quite good because we're also going through the 10-year economic development strategy research and consultation process, which will be happening over the summer and the fall. I think I'll be doing the economic base analysis will be done by August. So that'll give us an idea in terms of our economic makeup here from a detailed perspective and where we should be looking in terms of what our real strengths are from a job creation perspective. So we're getting into that now. So I think in the fall, you'll have a way better update in terms of what we've done. The GNCC is at the table of these conversations as well. So people will be apprised of, some of the initiatives that we will do pretty soon.
I appreciate that. And for those of you who are in attendance and might have some follow-up questions, please feel free to connect with us directly. We can also provide you the contact information for Valerie Kuhn, Blake's colleague that he had mentioned when it comes specifically to micro-credentials and training that's there. We got another question, and this one is from Denise, and she was really interested in seeing that a high number of women responded to the survey. And her question to you is if the region can be marketed to female entrepreneurs as an excellent place to start and grow business. So this is a different approach to it. We're not looking specifically at a sector, but we're looking at a demographic that maybe we find we're interested in attracting and growing. And Blake, any thoughts on that aspect?
Actually, I think that's a brilliant idea for investment marketing. I've never heard of any economic development offices or, marketing to, to women specifically. Usually it's like industry or sector specific, but that's a very good idea. And that's why it's important to do this research so we have that information. So, I'm going to bring this up at our team meeting to our marketing manager to say, hey, maybe we should be thinking about something around these lines. We probably should, because we have that data. Most other regions don't know that, but we took the effort to go and figure that out. So now we can market ourselves as a place that's friendly or that is composed of many successful women entrepreneurs and businesses. And I know right off the top of my head, I could name many very good companies, but I think that could be a very smart marketing angle that a lot of other communities really aren't doing. And I think right now it's going to be very important to be innovative in this way in order to set yourself apart from the other regions who we compete against for investment. So it hasn't been done to my knowledge. I know there have been funding programs dedicated to, women entrepreneurs that have been administered in Niagara, but in terms of marketing, I think that's a very good idea. And I made a note, you could see me, you saw me writing, and I'm gonna bring that up with our marketing manager and my team, because I think it's a great idea, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. And so thanks to Denise too. And I'm going to put a GNCC plug in here. We have also a council called the Women in Niagara Council that is made up of female entrepreneurs. So if anyone is interested in specific supports that are there to support women in business, please feel free to reach out to us on this one or directly to our WIN Council, which is a committee made up of female entrepreneurs, and the information is available on our website as well. But on that note, respondents have told you that it will take years to recover from the effects of the pandemic. Is there any action we might take individually or collectively as a region that would speed up our recovery?
The way I would answer that now is that it's going to be a concerted effort of all stakeholders in Niagara, and everyone has a real unique role to play. So the GNCC is the voice of businesses, so you can advocate to us if your businesses are indicating that they need something. That's important to kind of let us know so we can then work towards those particular needs. But again, I think my response is that everyone has a unique role to play, and everyone needs to kind of understand that role and kind of the greater ecosystem that supports businesses in Niagara. And I think it's going to be important to actually, be well coordinated in our response. So at this point, I can't say specifically who's going to do what. It's not really my role to suggest that, but all I can say is that you see a lot of the challenges and obstacles that I've listed. So there's going to be roles for advocacy groups like GNCC, for business support groups like Niagara College, Brock, the enterprise centers, Venture Niagara, the Community Futures Development Corporation. So there's a role for everyone, and I think that it'll be important to be well coordinated going forward, and then defining that role as to who does what. And I think this is laid out somewhat at a high level in our COVID-19 recovery strategy, which is available on the NiagaraCanada.com website. You will be able to go there and download that strategy to, and some of these responsibilities or roles are highlighted in that strategy.
No, I appreciate that. And I think I'm always being reminded, Blake, is that we really are a community of businesses and organizations, and that the collaboration is what actually ensures that we are successful in the long term of it. The results of your survey indicate that accessing government grants has suddenly become hugely important to organizations. Do you think the changed relationship between business and government during the pandemic will have a lasting effect afterwards? And if yes, what might that be? And I personally see it as really being an opportunity of creating stronger ties and connections between the private and public sector. I personally see it like that, because we depend on one another, but I would like to get your insight on it.
I believe so. So the government has always, incentivized certain things like employee training, employee productivity, hiring new employees, new capital investments, new research and development to, new intellectual property. So I've worked in that area for many years, and there's always been support in that area. It just takes someone who knows how to navigate it all, which is very challenging. But I think what the pandemic has done is actually shown the greater business community that, the government can be here to support. However, they need to hear from businesses in terms of what they need. So oftentimes you do have people who are somewhat removed from the business, designing some of these programs and administering them. But I do believe that it will be a critical relationship over the next at least 3 years and probably longer, because of some of the financial burden experienced by the businesses by things like stay-at-home orders and what have you. So that said, I believe there's probably going to be some long-term programming. I believe it's going to be very sector and industry specific, because one program may not work for all different businesses. I know businesses in accommodation and food services will have a very different need than businesses in manufacturing or even arts, culture, and entertainment. So I believe the programs we're going to see, so some of the generalized COVID programs are probably being rolled out right now, but I believe they will be replaced, or at least we will see new programs that are very sector specific that deal with certain challenges experienced by every sector. And I believe these programs will probably exist for a few years. That's my crystal ball forecast, basically.
On that note of a crystal ball, there is one other question that has come forward. I'm conscious of the time because we only have like 2 minutes left, but people are asking, is the region going to continue doing these surveys? And hopefully still we will be at that time at a stage where we have reopened most of our economy. But what is the foundation of what you're looking at? Do you think that we're going back to normal in the months to come, that we are going to see the impact of the roaring 20s, as some people are indicating? And lastly, the continued commitment from the region to conduct such surveys that are really helpful to the community.
Okay, that's actually another great question. I'm very cognizant that people don't like completing surveys generally. We did get, our response rate went from very high with our first survey to a little bit lower to about less than half for our latest survey. And it's not for lack of distribution efforts. We put in, the same level of effort. But I know businesses get survey fatigue. I know anybody gets survey fatigue. So that was a challenge this time around. I did the survey. We needed the data. We needed updated information because we didn't, it was a year old from our previous survey. So it's important for everyone to recognize that without this data and information, we have nothing to go on when we go advocating for resources, when we're trying to design programming that meets the needs of businesses. So, you know, without their feedback, we can't be effective. So these businesses are critical. And that's why it's so good for our partners in the chambers and the business associations and the local EDOs to assist in this. We all recognize the need for this because we work with the data. We advocate with the data as our kind of foundation. That's how we identify the issues. So that's, we need the information. I'm cognizant that the more we go out, the fewer responses, and the quality starts to suffer a little bit. Do we plan to do another survey? I don't know yet. It's really decided by our economic rapid response team, which is made up of all of the economic development offices in collaboration with many other business groups. So I would like to do one maybe in the fall. Maybe when things have reopened and businesses start to see what their reality is looking forward over the next year or two. I think that would be a great time to do it, and then benchmark that against the survey we just did, and that will give us some important insights that we will need, and also to test kind of how businesses are faring through the recovery process. So yeah, I believe it's necessary, and I believe it should probably be done later in the fall.
Yeah, thank you so very much. I can tell you from the response that we get to surveys and data, Naga specific data that is coming out, how welcomed it is by the business community. So thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you for being with us this morning. Your insight was much needed in assisting also us as a business community in determining our next steps. Overall, I have to say you have left us with a level of optimism, which I think at this time is often much needed. And so it was really good to see. To all the attendees and participants today, thank you so very much for being with us today. We will share the presentation and any contact information that you might require with you in a follow-up email. And a recording of this webinar is also going to be available on our site. If you have any additional questions regarding resources or subsidies, please don't hesitate turning to gncc.ca, and I think you will find quite a few of those answers there. So thank you very much, and to everyone, have a wonderful remainder of the day. Thank you, Blake.
Thanks, everyone.